Hello, my name is Mr. M, ICT, or Karl McGrath, and this is my session on primary history task design. So, just a little introduction. My name's Karl McGrath. I'm a teacher at Newcastle. I'm also the curriculum task design lead. I'm currently a Year 6 teacher. My role kind of affords me a level of responsibility across the curriculum, working in conjunction with the curriculum lead and the curriculum team. My specific role is looking at how the curriculum is implemented within the classroom. So that development from curriculum idea and plan down to tasks and pedagogy. So just a brief context, just to give you an idea of the school and the area we're in and sort of what we're working with. So we've been on a journey over a few years. So I would say I joined last year. The school's been developing the curriculum about 2 or 3 years before that, and the whole idea was really where everyone really is. Obviously, the framework came in, and the curriculum needed redevelopment. Our real focus is on the curriculum as the progression model. So we're clearly laying out the knowledge that the children need to access the learning, and it's that idea that the children don't know, then they can't do. So it's that real relationship between substantive knowledge and disciplinary knowledge, and how that's really key to the learning going forward. So one of the things we do is we have our roadmaps, which I know lots of schools have, but it clearly lays out the subject content for each half term within each year group, and then that's broken down even further for the teachers by the subject lead in a very specific sequence of lessons. The roadmaps have now started to highlight sort of disciplinary and substantive concepts throughout the year groups, so we really pull these in and apply them across the board. I think the big thing to think about for me is whether you are a curriculum lead or a history teacher or a primary history teacher, or teaching history at primary, is thinking about your story arc, or what's the origin story and where's the ending for the sequence of lessons, and how you're going to get the children from A to B essentially. And obviously, what is the substantive concepts, what's the disciplinary. But my key role is on task design and that idea of what is a task. So I suppose to contextualize this session, the main thing would be looking at a task as some sort of goal-orientated product. So there has to be something achieved at the end. That doesn't have to be something tangible, but it has to be an achievement of some sorts. There's usually resources or givens available in the situation. So this is something that supports the learners in developing their understanding. And the tasks always have a set of operations that can be used within the resources, or a set of rules essentially. One of the things that I've developed is my own sort of task design model based on this. So obviously this is sort of things that I think are my effective task design principles. So good tasks should form off the basis of really clear, direct instruction. It should allow opportunities for the children to discuss with their peers or with others, to be able to apply concepts that they're toying with, whether that's substantive or disciplinary, and then obviously have the opportunity to recall that, so really stretch that work in memory. And then I really think it's important for children to have an opportunity to extend their mind, obviously both through challenges, but also bringing what's in their head outside, so working with the knowledge on an exterior space based on the extended mind theory. And then really just to be able to generalize and conceptualize an idea and form a really clear picture in their brain or in their mind of what that is. So the key things for me, based on that as a task, is not an activity. So it's not just the children doing something, because we all know that that's a poor proxy of learning, and doing doesn't equal understanding. So task design and knowledge should still encourage creativity, but I think it's really important to say that if you haven't got that strong basis in I would say a knowledge-rich curriculum, but if you haven't got a really thought-out curriculum, then you can't really start developing that task design approach. So it really just ensures a purpose across the board. Another way to think of that is sort of the Edwards task design model. So you're sort of working through from quadrants 1 to 4. One's really that introduction of key concepts and the key knowledge. 2 being developing those really tight, structured learning opportunities. And 3's where you're starting to make little connections across other concepts, or really honing that understanding of what that general idea is. It's then when you start demonstrating key grasps of real clear knowledge and clear pictures, you can start generalizing, making links to other concepts, and that's where you've got yourself into quadrant 4. I think the big thing for me is if you're developing a task, it should be a little bit challenging, but also what is it you're actually demanding of the students? So are you just getting them to label something? Are you just getting them to label a diagram of a Roman soldier, which in itself is not a poor task, but on its own and in isolation, it doesn't really stretch or demand anything from the children. So in classroom practice, there's a couple of things that I like to think of. So in school, we've sort of developed a model of task design. So what tasks are we giving the children that really encourage their thinking or interacting with their knowledge in a disciplinary way? And sort of go through these. These aren't a taxonomy, so it's not something you work through. These are in relation with each other. So the first is that developing an intrigue and interest, so tasks that really support sort of a wider zoomed out thinking, just generalizing an idea, open-ended questions, images to infer from, what ifs, or even discussion models. So things that you might do is, there's really nice videos on YouTube and you get to see historical journeys from one person to another country and just sort of looking at that. So we use this GIF, which isn't playing on the slides, but it was looking at the Viking journey across the world and what that tells us about the Vikings just in a general picture. And then even in the ancient Egyptians, we looked at the map of the now from a satellite view. Now obviously we said this is now. What does this tell us about the area that the ancient Egyptians existed in? What does this tell us? And all the children were sort of unpicking that idea. Lots of green around, sort of enveloped by the desert region. And then going further from there. So it really develops that open-ended intrigue and interest. And then from that point, obviously you may have an opportunity to really interact with the learning at key phases. So this can be unpicking vocabulary and playing with key words. So unpicking etymology and morphology. So if you're looking at the word civilization, well, what does civil mean? What does that mean as a word? Can we put that with other words? And I'll have an example of other examples we've done that in. So looking at things like heptarchy. And then this is an idea that developed from Stuart Tiffany. So a concept about thinking about chronological concurrence. So really I wanted to get the children to develop that understanding that there's lots of different things that happened at the same time in history. And I don't think they were very clear on that. And obviously we've shown them lots of timelines and given them those either in books or on the screen. But it wasn't really until they started building them themselves that they could see that each cube represented a specific amount of time and that all these things happened at the same time, that they really got that picture. So sort of extending their mind and developing an outward picture of what they're talking about is really useful. Another thing that's really important in tasks, I think, is offering lots of variation within the tasks that you give them. So if you're giving them a map, can you give them more than one to really have a look at how that changes over time? Or, if you're giving them tasks to sort of say, is this an Egyptian or is this, so a task that we're really thinking about at the minute is Maya or not. And on the actual task it has a geometric shape of a pyramid, not one that's Maya or Egyptian. A picture of a Cadbury chocolate bar and then the number 0 on a number line. And obviously those three things could be Maya, but they could be other things. And obviously because there's a variation within the images and because it's quite open, then there's an opportunity for them really to develop their thinking further from that. The next sort of station, obviously there's a little bit of the G has dropped off my reasoning there. The next thing we'll be looking at the reasoning within the lessons. So sort of asking those questions with a slight disciplinary edge to them. I mean, we're never going to come up with perfect questions and there are always going to be weak spots within them. But I think the key thing is really thinking about the verbs you're using for your deeper thinker questions. So I often refer to Bloom's taxonomy and sort of thinking of those evaluate and analyze sections. It's not always great, but it really helps me think about what types of questions I can ask. Obviously with feedback and sort of reflecting on the curriculum each year, we'll hone it and we'll change it and tweak it. And the idea within this lesson was just to think of what factors we could think of based on the part in that lesson that allowed the Vikings to travel as far as they did or invade Britain successfully. So we pulled in knowledge from the Anglo-Saxons, so really emphasising the curriculum as being key there, which they did in year 5, and the fact that they knew that actually by this stage, Britain was a heptarchy, so there wasn't a united front, so it meant that the Vikings could invade individual kingdoms, and possibly other kingdoms wouldn't communicate with each other, they wouldn't want to seem weak, and so on and so forth, so it wasn't that sort of united edge with them. And then another element of it is just that continuous repetition. So are we offering them the same thing over and over again so that they can really get to grips with what that looks like? So even as a task design approach, what we would do is create basic models. So the idea is make once, use lots. So then by the time the children have used it from year 1 all the way to year 6, they've got a task in front of them that they know how to work with, which then frees up their mind and their thinking completely on the learning and the knowledge. Obviously, we use things like retrieval tasks in every lesson. So an example on the slide there is a picture of the Roman exit, the 7 kingdoms, and the monasteries and manuscripts. And that was something from the Anglo-Saxons in year 5 that I felt was applicable to the lesson in year 6 for the Vikings. And just that key thing, the curriculum is the progression model. It's the star. So therefore, everything should build from there. So this is just an example of a couple of slides from the Anglo-Saxon lesson and how we would do that. So obviously explicitly teaching key vocab, really honing that in and talking about it as we go through. The same with the 7 kingdoms. So obviously, what do we know about the Anglo-Saxons so far? And obviously this is a year 5 lesson, so this is me jumping back just to contextualize this retrieval task and this whole lesson. And then obviously the fact that kingdoms, so king meaning kings, dom meaning domain, so kingdom, the area in which a king ruled. So again, breaking that up and really get to grips with the etymology and the definition of the word. And then, like we said, because the Anglo-Saxon Britain was a heptarchy, hept meaning 7, archy meaning rulers, there wasn't that united front. And then a simple task that we did at the end was, because this was the 5th lesson in a 6 lesson sequence of the Anglo-Saxons, what did the Anglo-Saxons leave behind? How do we know? I'm thinking about what an artifact was and examples. So obviously these images on the screen were just prompts for the children as a task to really scaffold their thinking. So they'd already covered Sutton Hoo, they'd already covered manuscripts, they'd covered monks and the importance of monks in writing things like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and what that taught us, as well as the things that they kept and the relics that they protected in the monasteries. And the idea was to get the children to think about, well, if we find manuscripts in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is one historical text, how does that work then with the artifacts that we find, like Sutton Hoo and so on? So that is very much a whistle-stop tour of task design in primary history. Hopefully that was helpful for some, and obviously that's the model that I would be working with. So really thinking about how you get in the interest and activating the interest. And I'm not talking about, invading a classroom or building an Anglo-Saxon house. I'm talking about something that's going to promote thinking rather than excitement. Because this is the thing with history. History is really exciting on its own. We don't have to wrap it up in anything dramatic. We don't have to paint it into a wonderful Anglo-Saxon house. We can make things within history that are already incredible. So I've been Mr. MICT, or Karl McGrath, and this has been the session on primary history task design. So hopefully that was useful, and thank you very much for listening.